Welcome back. I'm Cynthia Mompoint, and we are going through the Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report that I put together to analyze Massachusetts equity programs, particularly through the lens of those harmed the most by the war on drugs and by marijuana mass incarceration. We are now on observation 3, and for if you are just joining us now, we have a series of video clips where we're highlighting each recommendation that's been provided to the leadership here in Massachusetts in this for the cannabis industry. We're looking at observations that have been made and recommendations for those observations. So we're now on observation 3, which states insufficient accommodations for EEs and SEs, and to date, no funding or financial support. And this is part 1. Observation 4 is very similar. The recommendations, though, are slightly different. Recommendation 3 states, mandate that municipalities submit to the CCC their social equity program, which aligns with the CCC's equity program, not competes by creating another level of exclusivity for residents and excluding the state participants, and that the CCC should then prioritize review of applicants based on the municipality's implementation of equity. Secondly, be thoughtful, purposeful, bold, and creative in securing and dispersing funds to support entrepreneurial endeavors and establishments of SEs and EEs with little to no barrier. And third, enumerate the licensing process to show the difference between priority, expedited, and general applicant status, accounting for details in communication, timeline, and approximate time frame for review. So with each observation and recommendation, I provide a list of evidence as to why it is these observations were made, and then some commentary as to why those were the recommendations that we put forth. And in this instance, the first observation is that there have been 193 applications approved with a provisional or final license. Of those licensees, approximately 10 have gone to EEs or SEs. There are nearly 400 applications under review, and of those applications under review, 8 are EEs. The CCC has not delineated the difference between priority and expedited status, other than who holds that status. And the accommodations extended to EEs have been extended to SEs, DBEs, and micro businesses, with no clear distinction if priority trumps expedited review, and if it does, how so? And so the point here is that while some of these other categories, when we talk about DBEs, we're looking at minority-owned businesses, and minority extends beyond black and brown. It's basically any business that's not white-owned. We're talking about veteran-owned businesses. We're talking about women-owned businesses, which could be white women, but women-owned businesses as well. And micro businesses are a form of licensure category. So when we say that the expedited review status has been extended to these other categories, it's great for the purposes of promoting diversity in ownership and promoting the diversity in the data that shows what the current landscape of Massachusetts looks like. However, it is EEs who are charged with economically empowering their communities, in addition to having positive impact plans. So it is the EEs who hold that charge, and yet there's no distinction as to what their priority status actually means. And in essence, it loses value when you extend that priority status to other groups who aren't mandated with the same expectations and high standards when it comes to impacting the community outside of a positive impact plan. Everyone is beholden to a positive impact plan, including EEs, and that positive impact plan goes above and beyond their staffing and contracting requirements. These are two key requirements that no one else has. And so, again, this is an example of how the accommodations, this priority status that it was supposed to be given to EEs, it's insufficient. Here it is, we have 193 applications through, but only 10 EEs, or it's actually less than 10 EEs, that have some form of license status at this point. And it begs the question that for those 8 EEs who are in queue, meaning their application is up for review, what does priority look like for them? And does it mean that all 8 should be going through next? That information needs to be communicated clearly, because as it stands right now, it doesn't look as though that priority status exists at all when it comes for economic empowerment certificate holders. And an example of that, for one of those currently EEs that currently now has a license status, she expressed her frustration in December of 2019 and January of 2020, where she had to really demonstrate that she had been waiting for over a year. I think her time frame was about 600 days for communication, clear communication as to what her priority status meant when it came to the status of her license. If you're an economic empowerment applicant, regardless of the changes that may be impacting your license due to all of the compliance and regulatory measures that are tied to pursuing a license, it shouldn't take that level of frustration for an EE to understand where they are in the process and how they can move quickly to obtain their license. And from a logic perspective, I go into this piece in the report. You have to question, how is it that EEs and R&Ds, who are established players in this industry, how is it that it's considered an accommodation when they're both given the same status? What accommodation is that? That's not equitable. There's nothing equitable. There isn't any equity there when the key measures and the key supports that are needed to have a successful application and to launch a successful establishment aren't being provided. The only thing that's provided is that priority status, and without having any other supports, that can't be deemed an accommodation considering the nature and landscape of the industry. The other point that we go into here is that the CCC finally recognized that the host community agreements were a problem. Since licensure application window opened, there were numerous complaints from EEs and general applicants alike in terms of the challenges that they were facing with obtaining host community agreements. And so one of the concerns that had been looming amongst the leadership was the fact that they felt as though they did not have the authority to review those host community agreements at the local level because they were between the marijuana establishment and the local municipality. And so finally, when the legislative body confirmed that the CCC does have that authority to review those applications, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to address the actual the problem that equity participants, particularly economic empowerment certificate holders, were facing in obtaining host community agreements. And so the ask of the legislative body did not go far enough. It did not go far enough to ensure that EEs were not being locked out of the industry because of local biases and the fact that there wasn't local buy-in or mandate for the state equity program. To offset that, the CCC did submit a letter to the legislative body that is currently under review, if you will, requesting that the local municipalities be held accountable to the same measures that the state is held to when it comes to ensuring an equitable and diverse participation at the ownership level in this industry. The other point that I wanted to add here was that there were numerous municipalities that have begun instituting their own social equity program that are not supportive of the state equity program participants. For example, the City of Boston's ordinance that was adopted in March of 2020 requires that any equity applicant be a resident of the city. And then in Somerville, they have a review process that recognizes state certified economic empowerment status, but it doesn't provide much merit in their decision to score favorably for any particular candidate. And I think these two municipalities provide an example as to why it's necessary to have an understanding and a mandate that every municipality have some form of equity program that aligns with the state equity program, because the state equity participants need to be able to obtain host community agreements where it is legal to have a marijuana establishment. The last piece of evidence that I do share here is that capital is a known barrier and significant capital is necessary to erect a marijuana establishment. And in February, in that same letter that I mentioned about the host community agreement, the CCC requested a social equity fund be legislated, and that the Massachusetts legislature is currently reviewing a bill to legislate funding for the social equity program. In that letter, the CCC recommended considering Oakland, California's and Illinois' equity funds for models to adapt for Massachusetts social equity program and the funding to support that. Now, for one thing, I hope that the CCC, from this report and from the other commentary that you're hearing from social equity participants, from economic empowerment certificate holders, the hope is that you will engage us to find out what terms and measures need to be in place when it comes to accessing the funds for the social equity program and for erecting a marijuana establishment, to ensure that we're not creating more barriers to access. That's one. And secondly, the decision has not been made. However, this is something that we do need to pay attention to, because we're going to see through this decision the true values, the priorities and the perspectives of the leadership here in this industry, both at the commission level and in the legislative body, when it comes to the participation of the equity program participants, when it comes to them being able to, for us being able to actually erect an establishment here, considering the barriers to establishment, particularly the two key barriers being capital and obtaining a host community agreement. So we're going to continue to stay tuned and watch how this unfolds, both at the legislative level and then when it's time for the regulatory policies to be drafted to support access and the opportunity to pursue a license. We have to pay close attention to that. Again, the key point that needs to be made is that the participants themselves need to be a part of that conversation and the decision making tied to that. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of acknowledgement for EEs and SEs in terms of their roles as leaders in this industry, as owners in this industry. And so it's imperative that that be done, and that municipalities are made aware of the role that they play in supporting that effort as well. It's not laid out in this report, but the social equity fund, the social equity funds that currently exist can be used by municipalities to enact their own local programming. So the mandate just needs to be that the local programming should align and support the participation of state equity the state equity program participants. So with that, we're going to pause and pick up in the next video clip on the insufficient accommodations. But we're going to focus on observation 4 and in that area of where the accommodations that currently exist for EEs and SEs is lacking. All right, thanks. See you in the next clip.